to incorporate the language where we both have the same language particularly in the grievance and arbitration provision. It doesn't show up in track changes. So, but it's something that was either in our initial proposal or was in both proposals. So in other words, to try and make it a little easier, and I'm not sure if that succeeded, the track changes for the grievance and arbitration proposal is really mostly new language or something that is different, dramatically different from what we had. And some of it, when I say dramatically, is probably an overstatement. Like if you're looking at the grievance procedure, we still have a section there that indicates what must be in the grievance in writing. On page 2 there, ABC section should be 5. There's a numbering issue there again. I believe your proposal had it set up to where you have incorporate a form, which presumably some of this stuff would be incorporated into the form, which I don't think we're opposed to. There's no philosophical difference there, but until we work out the details of what's in the form, I have it spelled out here. This is what we'd like to see in the grievance. That is a statement of the grievance and the facts involved, the remedy requested in the specific article or section number that's alleged to have been violated. If through the process of negotiation we don't need as much detail, but we put that in the form, so be it. I believe yours had the form, but I don't think we've seen a proposed form yet. So on the grievance provision, it seemed to me, even looking at our prior proposals back and forth, that for the most part we weren't too far off of the basic procedure. We did and still have in section 6, and I think the biggest differences, in my mind anyway, is section 6, the arbitration provision, which it looks like should be section 7. The number is fixed. Looking at page 3. So I want to call your attention to the bottom of page 3. In the track changes format. We had a statement in our initial proposal that where the college administrator is making a decision that necessarily requires the exercise of some discretion and judgment, the arbitrator wouldn't substitute his or her judgment for the administrator. We understood from your proposal that there was an issue with that. So trying to seek some common ground here, I've proposed that we have some check on the discretion of administration, in particular here. Insert the phrase, so long as the arbitrator finds that the exercise of discretion was not arbitrary or capricious. And to be candid, I think I know I mentioned this to one of your colleagues yesterday. Our view of the grievance and arbitration process, the arbitrator should come in as neutral to kind of decide the facts. For example, in a disciplinary context, we are accusing a faculty member of theft and we discipline. Arbitrator come in and faculty member says, no, I didn't do that. We say you did. Arbitrator hears all the facts, decides what the facts are. We do not view, however, the arbitrator's role as being a member of management. So there are some things, once the facts are established, what level of discipline is appropriate is, in our view, a management decision, and not necessarily for an arbitrator. Now, we understand that if it's completely baseless or arbitrary decision, we can terminate a 20-year employee for being 5 minutes late. Morning, Dr. Beer.
How we doing?
Morning. All right.
I just want to say hello, commercial break. How we all doing?
Good.
I just want to let you know I appreciate all of y'all and the progress you're making. And we get all the videos and the highlights and all the great comments that are made. But I kind of want to show my face today and let you all know we've been trying to manipulate this budget so we can get the numbers looking decent. I know you all have been in all kinds of issues, but thank you for your work. Thank you for your work, and we're going to continue to make progress. And again, I kind of want to say hello. I know what's going on this morning. I'm sure you all have read and heard about the great baseball team we have here. Bob and Coach Will and Coach Calder was taking some pictures of the trophy, so it reminds me of success. So I want to make sure this meeting here continues to have a lot of success too. And I always say we don't always agree, but we want to respect each other, listen to each other, and do what, at the end of the day, the best for our students, college, and our community. So keep up the good work, and we'll keep our ears listening, and we want to do all we can to create a win-win. All right? Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. All right.
So picking up where I was at we do understand that there are times when the accusation is that management is acting so outside the bounds of reasonableness, it's arbitrary and capricious. So that's sort of the check that we are suggesting is the compromise there at the bottom of page 3. Other differences in our proposal, I think that we need to work to overcome are we do have the burden of proof in all cases on whoever is filing the grievance, which usually we understand is going to be a union or aggrieved employee. But frankly, a lot of this other stuff is we're getting close to agreements on the basic process and grievance procedure. When you have a moment, you can look through them. I'm happy to answer questions. Turning to Article 6, the discipline discharge, let me walk through a little bit about what we did here, and then give you the opportunity to respond, or if you have questions, or if you want to break and talk amongst yourself, let us know. So discipline discharge, in response to your...
Do you have an extra copy of that? Thank you.
So recall going back, our initial proposal, we focused on really termination of employment and tracked in section 1 and 2 the standards that are already in policy and regulation for either terminating a continuing contract faculty member or a midterm termination of an annual contract faculty member. And that is largely remaining the same in articles, or sections 1 and 2 of this article. You, of course, pointed out that our prior proposal really didn't address any other types of disciplinary actions. So that's really what we've tried to focus on here. And we've done that by adding language in section 3 and trying to come up with a compromise. I understand union's proposal really to be a just cause type proposal for disciplinary action. So we've incorporated that standard for other disciplinary action. The other disciplinary actions recognized by the college are those set forth in section 3, subsection A, 3A, that is, and it's warning, reprimand, probation, or suspension without pay or demotion. Fairly uncommon with faculty, but might happen. So section 3A essentially says if we're going to take any of those actions, we have to have just cause to do so. Now, what we're asking the union to consider then is if we're willing to impose that just cause standard, which is different from our current policy, that we don't want to be in a position where we have to arbitrate what I consider the less serious disciplinary action. That's the warning, oral counselings, and reprimands. You can still grieve it, go all the way up to the cliff of arbitration, if you will, all the way up to the president on warnings and reprimands. Now, probation, suspension without pay, demotion, those kinds of things that put your position more in jeopardy or have a direct economic consequence, then you can arbitrate it. So that's really the intent of section 3A and B, and we have some slightly different language than what we have, but we incorporated from your proposal, the Weingarten right, which is a section 4, the right to have a representative present whenever faculty member is called into a meeting that reasonably could result in disciplinary action. You do have that right to have a representative. So we incorporated that, although the language is a little bit different from yours. I just tried to tighten it up a little bit, frankly, but I don't think we're philosophically opposed to that, and I think that's the law anyway. So with that, if you have questions or if you want to discuss anything or want to meet on your own, let us know.
Yeah, one question. I'm sure I'll think of more as I kind of read through this again. So in your last sentence there, in right representation, so for example, shall not obstruct, interfere with, or otherwise impede the process. I'm wondering if you could speak to types of behaviors you would view as impeding or obstructing versus.
Yeah, and this is, and that's a good question, because let me explain the difference as I see it between your language and ours. Your language, I think, was a little more broad and might be something where we have an A and a B under this. Our language is really, this is the right to representation at the pre-disciplinary stage, where someone's called into a meeting and what happened? Did you steal the money, kind of thing. I'm using that just as an example, by the way. That's obviously not something that comes up very often in this field, but you're right. You're allowed to have a representative there. And the representative, in our view, is someone to advise the employee. And it happens pretty frequently, usually not a problem. However, occasionally, particularly when you get lawyers involved, so you can blame the lawyers. You get lawyers involved, a lot of times it becomes very adversarial, and the lawyer wants to, on the employee side, or tries to commandeer the process. So from my viewpoint, this is usually an investigatory meeting we're talking about. We, as the employer, have the right to ask questions and have the employee answer the questions, not the lawyers, not the representatives. It's not an opportunity for the lawyers or representatives to cross-examine management at that point. So from our view it's just to advise the employee, not to engage in a formal proceeding. Now you do have formal proceeding. This is what I think yours was a little more broad, that throughout the steps of the grievance process, if you get to grievance, arbitration, certainly you're going to have more of a trial-like adversarial proceeding, where if you have a lawyer, a union representative will act as advocate, will certainly get the opportunity to present evidence, cross-examine management, that sort of thing. That's not included in our section 4. Yours seem to blend those two, and if that's the concern, I think we could certainly flesh it out in a separate section. But
Okay, well, I mean, I've seen language that looks kind of like this before, and I've had strange interpretations of it, so I guess that's why I asked the question. I had a principal once who I was taking notes, and I asked him to wait because I was taking notes, and they said I was obstructing the process and wanted to throw me out of the meeting. I was like, fine, you can do that. We'll file for labor practice. I don't have a problem. So, I mean, as long as the normal sort of advocacy things aren't going to be construed as obstructing the process, I don't.
yeah, I wouldn't think that would be obstructing, quite frankly. The main one I see it come up is when the representative is not letting the employee answer. If it's an investigatory, they're saying don't answer, that sort of thing. If you do that, no, we're not going to torture you to get you to answer, but that in our mind would be insubordination and can constitute grounds for disciplinary action. So we want to make it clear, because sometimes, particularly when you get the lawyers involved, frankly, they come in and they don't want to let the employee talk or answer the questions. They want to be the one to talk. In our mind, that's obstruction.
Okay, I think I understand. There are a couple of other things I just had quick questions and points about. So back on the grievance procedure on the first page, grievance may be amended anytime during any step of the process until arbitration is demanded. I think we had.
Yeah, you had 10 days
We
following.
had 10 days. Yeah, so was there a sort of procedural or other reason for that difference?
Yeah, the reason really in my mind is it made better sense. So with an amendment, what we'd like to do is we don't want either side to sandbag the other side. So once you're at arbitration, you've selected an arbitrator. At that point, everybody should know what their positions are. So if you go back and amend it, there's no chance in the earlier informal steps, if you will, to really address that or just get further information. If you wanted to have the ability to amend it beyond the demand for arbitration, it seems like we may want to add language that says we can go back to an earlier step then. Because I don't want to end up in an arbitration that's expensive, time consuming, with an amended charge that had we met, whether it's the VP or president, we would have sorted it out or developed those facts. So that's really what that's about.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm not sort of in a vacuum, I don't have an issue with that language. I think the reason we had put 10 days is because our proposal also had a 10-day timeline on raising arbitrability issues. I think we feel it's fair for those to be kind of the same timeline. Don't really care whether it's at the point of being filed or 10 days later or 2 days later or whatever. I think it's fair for those things to have the same deadline, because for the same, I don't want to get sandbagged with an arbitrability argument, in the
Well,
same way.
maybe we put a caveat there that up till the date of selecting the arbitrator, with the exception of you get 10 days to raise arbitrability or something along those lines. But I don't have a big deal with the arbitrability issue being raised. Presumably by that time, I think most of the time we know about that. But I do see it get frequently raised a lot, where the merits get changed as you get to the arbitration, and you end up arbitrating a case that is dramatically different than what you were talking about at earlier stages in the grievance process.
Right, yeah, no, I get that. I'm just trying to think of how for it to be, because I mean, on the one hand, I'm just kind of talking out loud. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for, I mean, I think we want it to be the same timeline for both those things, whether it's amending the grievance or raising arbitrability. They should both be done by sort of the same time, but does it make sense for your deadline to raise arbitrability to be tied to our filing for arbitration? It's something I'll have to think about, but that's why I keyed in on that. It wasn't the general concern of being sandbagged. It was, we felt it was fair to have those things follow kind of the same timeline, so we'll think about it. Kind of a new thing here in the informal stuff that I don't think either side had in its previous proposals, about 10 days of the events giving rise to the grievance for the informal step.
Yeah, and that's why I just sort of recognize as kind of a deficiency that we have not really what triggers that first step. And I recognize it's an informal step, but without a timeline, it really weakens the rest of the timelines. Someone could come in theoretically and say, well, I just talked to my supervisor about something. It was occurred 9 months ago, but now I have the ability to go to every step of the process. And from my perspective, there should be some time. I chose 10 days, quite frankly, because that was the same as the rest of the steps.
Right. Yeah, and I don't necessarily have an issue with there being a timeline, sort of generally speaking. I don't, as the person who has to go to arbitration, I don't want to be trying to get witnesses to remember what happened 2 years ago, and you're just now deciding to file a grievance about it.
Yeah, usually you know pretty quickly if there's going to be a disagreement. So, and
Right.
there's some informal discussions and things of that nature. So I don't usually find it to be an issue, but I do think we want to have something in the contract that addresses it.
Yeah, the only thing I'm thinking there we might want to tweak a little bit is sometimes there are things that someone sort of says they're going to do something that would be a grievance, and then they don't do it for a long time, but then they do it 6 months later. And I've had this happen. Someone said, sort of complained about it. Manager didn't do it. Management did it 9 months later, and we said, well, you did the thing, so now you need to file a grievance. And I said, no, but it says you had to do it within 10 days of when you should have known it was going to. And then, we had this big arbitrability argument over whether we timely filed the grievance. So,
Well, and that's the language I have here. 10 days of the facts giving rise to the grievance is maybe a little ambiguous, and you can tighten that up along lines of 10 days from the effective, the implementation of the decision or something along
Right,
those lines, as opposed to we're considering implementing. I get what you're saying. Sometimes the decision-making process is a little ambiguous itself. If we want some more hard and fast, maybe it's to be anytime before or 10 days, latest 10 days from the actual decision being implemented. I think we'd be open to brainstorm on it and let us know what you think makes sense there.
On the part about the remedy requested, often what I find is you file a grievance, things happen, you kind of look into it more, you find out something else has happened, and that's usually what leads to amending a grievance. So maybe the more general question here is, can amending a grievance involve amending the remedy?
I think if we had the limitation on the timing for amendment, as we're just discussed a moment ago, I don't see why there would be a problem doing that. You can change the language instead of saying the remedy requested may not be expanded at later steps. Have some language that has a caveat for less amended, timely amended, something along those lines. Again, I think what we're trying to do in concept is to try and if you get to arbitration, try and arbitrate the grievance and not something different. And it unfortunately happens a lot where it changes over the time and you end up arbitrating something that looks vastly different. If we do it all through an amendment at a certain time where everybody knows going into the hearing, with arbitration, it's a lot like a little trial, but you don't have a lot of the pre-trial type procedure, deposition statements, evidence. I mean, I don't typically do it, but you can get games played on either side where you sandbag one another, and that's not great for the process. You show up, and the first time you're hearing of some evidence or some arguments is at the arbitration. I know the union doesn't like that when employers do it, and employers don't like it. So trying to avoid that really just by saying that once we get to that arbitration step, we should basically know what the dispute's about, what each side's evidence is, and obviously there won't be an agreement, but that's where the third party comes in. So something that puts all that together and with the remedy as well, I think we'd be open to that.
Okay, we'll work on that. Just take another look at the rest of the discipline here. Okay, so on the first sort of couple pages here, we talked about this a little bit last time. And I'll just say it again, I think it is unusual to spell out in this level of detail all the different types of offenses that could result in discipline.
I'm sorry, you're on a discipline.
Yeah, we're on
Okay.
discipline now, sorry. Yeah, so like I was saying, this is just not something, I don't know that I've ever seen, sort of a page and a half or more about, here are all the things that employees can be disciplined for, or that employees shouldn't do.
Well, and just to be clear, our proposal is, you're looking at sections 1 and 2. These are and these really just come from the board policy and the state regulations on terminating continuing contract or annual contract midterm. So, all of the things in subsection 1A, for example, with the various reasons we're not trying to say that's the definition of just cause for other disciplinary actions. Really, in our mindset, you've disciplined on those two different groups, terminating contract versus all other discipline. And by the same token, we're proposing, as we did last time, that if you're in that first basket of termination procedure, then that's not subject to arbitration. That's still subject through your procedures. You have hearing rights in place already for any of those, and we're proposing that those and it's in here, it's basically kept as we have currently under the board rule. You get a hearing either for the board, or they can use an administrative law judge from the Division of Administrative Hearings. So you have those protections already in place for termination of continuing contract or bump back down to annual contract. And also for midterm terminations of the annual contract. There is that distinction. The just cause for all other disciplinary, we haven't attempted to define along the lines of what you're alluding to, Graham. That's a body of arbitration law would govern what constitutes just cause.
Okay, on section 2, I noticed strike-throughs suspended without pay.
Right, so that was in our initial proposal. And what I did there was to try and move that to the second basket, because that was in our initial proposal, because that's what's in the board rule right now. But I'm proposing a suspension really is different from a termination of the contract. So it makes better sense to have that be in the just cause basket in section 3 was the thought there. Would be different from the current policy. That said, I don't think we care if we kept it in section 2, but we figured you would prefer it in section 3. Right?
Okay, yeah, I was just, want to make sure I understood what
Mhm.
the effect was. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have. I think we need to discuss. Can you send?
Yeah, I sent it to you right now.
Okay, got him.
I haven't sent them yet.
No, I got a different email.
They're really good.
Technology.
I'm just trying to make sure I get the latest draft to you.
We're in second Tyler's took over.
Now we're coming your way.
If there's a printer, or if we want to print something, is there somewhere in the area we could run to? I left something without my printer this morning.
Email it to.
Marissa,
Yeah,
Marissa Binder.
right. You'd have to email her the document you wish for her to print.
Okay,
She can print it.
okay, got him this time. All right, so we'll talk. Where are our caucus rooms gonna be?
We can leave you guys here.
Yeah,
We
we
have,
have another room that we can go to.
And, where will?
It's right around the corner, B109. Yeah, you go out the side door here and it's like, you'll see another door that's right on the corner. We'll be in there.
I want to set a time of your.
I have to go unlock it.
I'll check in about half an hour.
B109, if you need,
Yeah.
there's the email.
Yes, it's Binder, BINDERM, as in Marissa, @phsc.edu.
EINDERN.
Yep.
As the address.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I will unlock you and not-
What? Oh, are they?
There's, well, do you want, you can go to the cafe right across the thing, or there might be a vending machine.
Yeah, that's, I just need some water.
See, there's probably a vending
It's
machine.
just, I'm just serious. I wasn't there looking at it.
Yeah.